Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pamela Scott Crace, and I am a regular team member of Adriana Dolnyckyj's growing design thinking practice. I retired as editor of a regional business magazine called Progress in 2013. Creativity and business design were topics of keen interest to me when my job was crafting relevant content for entrepreneurs and business leaders in Atlantic Canada. Of interest to this audience is that I enjoyed a really close partnership with the Sobey School of Business during my time at Progress, as together we developed and published an annual ranking and analysis of the top 101 companies of Atlantic Canada using a custom designed balanced scorecard. So thank you all for joining today's webinar, Innovate Through Disruption with Design Thinking. The Sobey School of Business Community Revitalization and Prosperity Network is exploring how we can come out of this crisis stronger than before. And to that end, it's mobilizing its resident expertise and engaging with industry groups, business owners, and community leaders. By bringing together academic and operational expertise, we can find better solutions to the problems that we all face. So today's expert is my good friend, Adriana Dolnyckyj. Adriana is the founding and managing partner of Design Thinkers Group Canada, a global innovation consultancy originating in Amsterdam in 2007. Adriana leverages more than 20 years of strategy and marketing experience and combines it with human-centered design to help organizations find the sweet spot of value proposition and differentiation. And the goal is making them more compelling to their customers and employees and unique against competition. Design Thinkers Group consults with clients and teaches design thinking practice so organizations can achieve innovation by thinking differently and iterating rapidly. Organizations that Adriana's worked with in her DT practice include Starbucks, Coca-Cola, Swiss Re, USAID, Agripur, and Bacardi, just to name a few. Adriana has an EMBA from St. Mary's, 02, and has taught in the Masters of Technology, Entrepreneurship and Innovation program. She's also served as president of the Alumni Association and on the St. Mary's Board of Governors. So before turning it over to Adriana, I just want to quickly discuss the format for today's webinar. You are all muted. Adriana will take us through our presentation, and immediately following, we'll have some Q&A. Questions can be sent anytime during the presentation, but will only be answered during the Q&A period, and just use your question box on the control panel to send. And we'll answer as many questions as time permits. And just as a little bonus, we have a special giveaway after the Q&A, and you'll hear more about that from Adriana. Adriana, over to you.
Great, Pamela, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's so wonderful to be here with you. To be honest, I'd prefer to see all your faces, but I guess this is what we're relegated to these days. So today I wanted to share, there has been an interest, a newer interest now around design thinking and what it can do for organizations and people personally. And oh, may I just get the next slide, please? Thank you. So I've always believed in the power of design thinking, and in the pre-COVID era, it allowed organizations kind of the time and space to disrupt themselves in order to get to really meaningful innovation versus just incremental improvement. But today, as the world has been disrupted by the pandemic, it has inherently shown weakness or inherent weaknesses in our organizations and our systems and society at large. And we believe that human-centered design is imperative. It's an imperative practice to get us to a better future. So everyone has the freedom to design the future they deserve, and I believe design thinking is the way to get there. Design thinking brings diversity of thinking, taps into collective creativity, and comes up with solutions that otherwise may have remained hidden. But before we jump into the, what design thinking is and how it can serve you, I'd like to just share an example everyone might be able to relate to. So could we have the next slide, please? So the air traveler's journey. Well, we haven't been having these journeys of recent, but I hope people can remember the old days when we were allowed to travel by air. Next slide, please. There are various stages to the experience of travel. Some are expected, some are not, and usually we prepare ourselves for the journey, and we know that there are going to be some not so pleasant experiences to getting to the other side. So next slide, please. So this is what we find in many airports, and I question whether we really believe that this is a human-centric designed way of getting through security. In fact, it really reminds me of the first industrial revolution, where everything is basically a production line. And it feels like this, or this is like how it feels to me anyway. Could I have the next? And what if it could look like this? So next slide, please. Oops, we're way ahead. There we go. So this is actually Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, and I hope you can see from the picture how that might feel very much different than the first slide I shared. So great experiences are intentionally designed by humans and for humans. So what is design thinking? Next slide, please. It's a problem-solving method that's really based on systematic and human-centric and multidisciplinary processes, and it generates value through integrating creative and analytical thinking. So there's a lot in there. There's the human-centered component, the collaboration, creativity, and so we'll just unpack that a little bit as we go through the presentation. So next slide, please. So from an organization standpoint, typically this is the lens they look through. You know, feasibility, can we do this? Do we have the technology? What's the great idea that we have? Or viability, is this viability? Should we do this? Is there a business model that supports this? And then they try to convince the world that what they have is what the world needs. So these are the typical lenses of the past. Next slide, please. But here is how design thinking approaches it. It always starts with desirability. And so what does the human being really need and or want? It sounds simple because we always assume that humans can tell us what they need or want. But they can't always tell you. So it's about finding the unarticulated need, and to do that, you have to kind of go through a method and a process of uncovering that need. And by starting with the desirability, it sets you on the right path. And any designer can design for each one of these sort of circles or lenses. But in design thinking, I feel that great design thinkers can actually bring all three into balance and thereby find like the true innovation sweet spot in the middle. Next slide, please. We have in fact added a fourth circle, and we call it integrity, and meaning trying to get impact, whether that's social impact or environmental impact. And it's not that it wasn't there before, it absolutely always was, but by adding, we wanted it to be more prominent so people would focus on it more. So we've added a fourth lens, if you will, to go for that innovation sweet spot. So innovation really isn't magic. It really can be designed, and it actually can be taught. So next slide, please. So going back to the airport example, if this is an experience, and perhaps not such a comfortable one, design thinking changes it into something like this. And next slide, please. A much more comfortable way to grab a nap at the airport. So next slide, please. So over and above the definition of design thinking, what it really boils down to is that it's a flexible methodology, flexible being the key word. It comes with a set of tools, and the set of tools there's a general set of tools out there, but after you practice and become really, really much better at it, you can actually design your own tools, which is really cool. And it comes with structured activities. But most crucially, it's about a mindset. Next slide, please. So as you can see from this Google search, there are many, 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 many design thinking methods. So these are images of some of them. For the purposes of this webinar, we're going to focus on one fairly simple one, but the message here is they're all variations on a theme. They all really emanate from the same place, and in general, they go through the same method and steps. So next slide, please. So this is the UK Design Council's version of the double diamond. And there's a reason for the diamond, but there's basically 4 phases in this one. The discover phase, where you empathize and you do your research. The define phase, where basically you're trying to garner some insight. Then you move on to the design phase, where you develop and ideate. So ideate, get ideas, try to find solutions. And the deliver phase, where you're basically prototyping and testing those prototypes and then actually implementing. And so what's important here is the fact that in the first part of the diamond, you're in the problem space. And what I love about design thinking is we're so programmed to go from, you hear a problem, you go to solution, you hear a problem, you go to solution. Design thinking forces you to stay in the problem space a little bit more, to go deeper in understanding why, what are some of the challenges that come with the problem. And in uncovering that, it might actually lead you in a different direction than what typically would happen when we try to go to solutions right away. And another very key important point is between the 2 diamonds, right at that where they meet. We call that the reframe point. And so after you've spent a whole bunch of your time in the problem space and you understand it at a deeper level, it enables you to really ask the right question, because now you have way more information. So you're reframing the challenge to potentially something far more focused in order for you to progress to the solution space. So next slide, please. And another piece that's very important about the double diamond is that it allows you to diverge. So diverge, go broad, get lots of information, create what we call create choices, and then you converge on the other end of it. And that's where you start making selections around, which choices you want to go through. So in other words, making choices, you're making choices at that point. And this diverge and converge happens both in the challenge space and in the solution space. And what's most important about design thinking is that it isn't a process. I don't like calling it a process, because a process intimates that it goes end to end. I more see it as a method, because at any point in time, you can revert back to an earlier stage if you get new information that requires you to rethink from the beginning. So it's to me, it's definitely more a method than a process. Next slide, please. But this is really how it feels, and I share this slide a lot up front with clients and people we work with and organizations, because it is imperative to let them know that this is what it's going to feel like. If you're trying to solve for complex challenges, there is going to be ambiguity with it. So it's an iterative and non-linear journey. And it's not that design thinkers are inherently disorganized or undisciplined. It's that design thinking fundamentally is an exploratory process. So it is not a straight line. And done well, it invariably can lead to unexpected discoveries along the way. So it's open-ended, open-minded, iterative process that sometimes does feel chaotic, especially for those practicing it at the outset. Next slide, please. However, there is definitely a business case for using design thinking. And if you look at the slide with the organizations on the right, this is from the Design Management Institute, and the organizations on the right who use design-centric, human-centric methods do outperform other organizations. And you can see, I couldn't find more recent data, but the most recent is from 2016 and over 13 years. You know, these organizations on the right outperform on the S&P index by 211%. Next slide, please. So we've talked about the method, and now let's sort of move to the mindsets. And I'm going to go through these briefly. So empathy, one of the biggest differences in the design thinking methodology compared to any others you'll find out there is that it's based on empathy. And you really have to walk in the shoes of the person you're designing for, whether that's your customer or your employee or your patient or whoever it might be, to understand it from their perspective. I see organizations constantly design from their own perspective instead of understanding you know, what their consumers are really going through. And with that, you have to kind of start with the beginner's mind, because you can't really find breakthrough ideas in your own head. It's collaborative, it's a team sport, so it encourages diversity of thinking, and that's the part I enjoy most. So you get people in a team with diverse areas of expertise, but if you've got the right players involved, you invariably get better solutions, and more importantly, you get the buy-in. So the idea is to include as many stakeholders to the challenge as you can in the process, and never, ever sort of design without actually the person you're designing for in the room, whether that be literally they are in the room or figuratively by bringing in the research that you've done with them into the room. So it's collaborative, it's creative, it's by practicing. You know, we don't often think of ourselves as creative, but we really are, and it's I always say it's a muscle you have to practice. But when you practice it, I find that's when we truly find our way to innovative solutions. It's iterative, so fail fast, fail often, they say. We'll try not to do that too often, but the idea that if you build quickly and use rapid prototyping, you can get to the right answer faster. So and prototyping are really not models of the right answer, but they are more better suited to asking questions about the solution you've come up with or how things work. And by understanding that, it gets you to the solution faster. It's action oriented, so we really believe in learning by doing. So not too much planning, not too much overthinking, but just get in there and start doing. And usually in the doing, things become clearer faster. So if you want to differentiate and innovate, you really have to kind of think and work differently. And last but not least, and it is optimistic, and I have not run into anybody who practices human-centered design and design thinking who isn't optimistic at heart and believes that there is a better way, to do things and design things. So inherently, it's optimistic. You don't find a lot of pessimists in this field. Okay, and next slide, please. So I'm going to share a little story because we were talking about empathy. So another little example of how design thinking can make an impact. For those of you who haven't heard of Doug Dietz, he works for GE Healthcare, and he's a designer that came up with, won the Red Dot Award for his MRI scanner. And if you go to the next slide, please, you can obviously see what it looks like. It's beautiful. This is obviously a floor model on the showroom floor, and it doesn't look like it's in the hospital situ. But basically, let me tell you a story. Once he created this, he actually went into the hospital to visit with the technicians to see how it was working. And the technician politely said, you know, it's working great. It's doing what we needed to do. It's got all the new gadgetry that we were asking for, but I can't, I'm gonna have to ask you to step out of the room for a moment because we have a patient coming in. So he steps out of the room, but then he gets captivated by a scene that he sees. Basically, he has, there's a child crying coming down the hall with her parents. And the father is saying, you know, remember we had this conversation, you have to be brave. And so he, in being captivated, he kind of follows this family back into the room. And as the child enters the room, she kind of freezes up. And all of a sudden, he has a whole different experience of, you know, of the thing that he created. So the room is dark, it's noisy, there's black and yellow hazard tape on the floor, and the actual scanner looks a bit like a brick with a hole in it, and everything's very, very beige. So in understanding that, having gained this empathy for a situation, a stressful situation that not only the child but the parents were going through, he felt that he could do better. And decided to redesign. So at the time, 80% of the children that were going through the scanner needed to be sedated to actually lie still enough for the scan to work. So in seeing things through their eyes, through different eyes, he went back to the drawing table and started employing design thinking methodology and tapped into early childhood development expertise and people who had the knowledge of, you know, how to captivate and work with children. And a year later, he came up with this. Next slide, please. So as you can see, completely different atmosphere and experience that it might provide for a child going through something stressful like a scan. This one's called Coral City. He did very many variations on the theme. So there's pirate ship and camping adventures. But the moral is, so a year after this new machine was launched, about a year, but a little bit over a year, only 2 kids needed to be sedated. So that in itself is a huge, huge win. Patient satisfaction numbers went up. So from an experience standpoint, 92%. More importantly, the volume of patients that could be put through the scanner went up. Patients were able to go through more smoothly, and that therefore reduced waiting times for others. So he achieved the immediate goal of, you know, less stress for and anxiety for the children and the parents. But that was the immediate goal. You know, when he heard the girl come out and say, you know, can we come back tomorrow? I think that speaks to the deeper emotional goal. He always said, my KPI is, did I change the conversation on the ride home? Did I change that conversation on the ride home? So you can't really design for money. You have to design for meaning. And that's the way he sums it up. So that's just another example of what something looks like before using design thinking versus after, and employing those empathic skills. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of empathy in business? Well, it creates, creativity improves when you use it, and it goes back to that employing empathy from the start, and it allows you to uncover new and different opportunities. And you can see from that stat that 12,000 plus product launches, 75% of them fail. Those that don't fail, they succeed in walking in the shoes of their consumer to uncover, kind of demand-driven insights. It improves not just user experience, but also performance. So here's another little stat from, it's a GE example as well, but it's from his NICU project. So 58% fewer negative touches in the NICU. If every time you touch a child in the NICU, it hurts them. So that was a huge thing to achieve. But from a business and ROI standpoint, he doubled the revenue and he grew the market share grew by 56%. So there's benefits on both sides. But again, you have to design for the meaning first. Next slide, please. And studies show that empathy is one of the top competences to have in great leadership. Yet only 40% seem to be proficient enough. So that says a lot. And my favorite one is the 88 rule. I don't know if you've heard of this, but Bain Management did a study of 400 organizations, and 80% of those organizations believed that they had superior customer experience. But Bain also went back to those organizations' customers, and by their way of thinking, only 8% of their customers agreed that they had superior customer experience. So it is important to turn that lens around. Next slide, please. But these were all numbers kind of looking back. Looking ahead, you can see, and 2020 has passed now, but customer experience will overtake price and product as a key brand differentiator. And I think we can agree that has happened. I'm not going to read off all the stats here, but customers want brands that understand them, and they're willing to pay for great customer experience. On the flip side, there are organizational risks if you don't employ empathy within your organization. So you can see here, 85% of employees agree empathy is undervalued by employers, and employees leave places that are empathy deficient. And so this doesn't just represent a loss of talent, but a loss of dollars to the tune of some 600 billion in lost productivity per year. So there are some real numbers behind this. So we've shared method and mindsets. Also wanted to share just what some of our tools look like. This is an empathy map canvas that we use. Its tools are just a way of organizing all the information coming back at you from your research and help you try and make sense of it to move forward. And finally, the last slide. And this is really why I believe in design thinking and why we've seen it really work, is because we can't use the same kind of thinking that we used previously if we want to come up with new and better ideas. So that concludes the presentation, or the formal part of the presentation. I just wanted to mention that we're doing a bit of a giveaway, a draw. So one of the books that I believe is a very good introduction to design thinking and gives a lot of examples of how it's worked is Change by Design from Tim Brown from IDEO, and there's a new edition out now. So for those who are interested, if you can, Bria has a method for you to leave your name and telephone number in the through the chat. We will draw for a winner who will receive the book, and hopefully for those who are interested, it'll give you a deeper understanding of where design thinking has made an impact in the world. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to open it up to Q&A. Oh, Pam, we can't hear you.
Thank you, Adriana. And thank you for showing me where my mute button is, the most overused phrase of 2020.
I think, yeah. Can you hear me now?
That was a great presentation. It's not like I haven't seen you give a presentation like that before, but I can tell you every time you take us through it, I have new light bulbs go off. So thank you again. We've opened it up for questions. I know that some of you actually have sent questions through to Bria using the question box on the control panel. So that is fantastic. Keep them coming. And let me just have a look here and throw one out. And this one is near and dear to my heart. So the question is, this kind of thinking seems to be well suited to the social innovation and social enterprise space, Adriana. So can you maybe speak a little bit about how you would use the design thinking method in a not-for-profit or social enterprise scenario?
Well, I think design thinking can be applied anywhere, quite frankly. So in any space, anywhere where you have a challenge that you have to, usually a complex challenge that you have to sort of dissect and unpack, you can apply design thinking. And one of the great things is that it is a community building. In going through the process, you're talking to a lot of people, you're involving all the stakeholders involved in the challenge. So these are things that apply not only to business, but apply to the not-for-profit sector as well. We have a client that we've worked with in Newfoundland in the not-for-profit sector, whose goal is to bring together the arts community and the business community to develop better ways of, exporting Newfoundland ingenuity. But they truly believe in bringing arts together with business is the way to do it. And they have completely landed on design thinking as the way to bring these two communities together, to get to just completely different expertise and skill set, but bring these two communities together to come up with some really innovative things, innovative thinking, new ways of doing things. Does that answer?
Yeah, that's been a great project, and you and I have worked on that one together. But other ones that we've worked on in that space, we've led people, really interesting groups, through questions around ageism in society, for example, and we've also used a design thinking method to address issues around attitudes toward immigration in Nova Scotia. So it does allow you to explore the social space.
And even when we're working with businesses, when we're trying to get their heads around design thinking, before we delve into their actual challenges, we sometimes pick a challenge, usually a societal challenge, and it helps them to understand design thinking method in and of itself first before they take on their own challenges.
Thanks. Another question, and let's go back to the B2B. So the question is, how does design thinking apply to sales in a B2B context?
Well, if you employ design thinking, sales should be just, you shouldn't have to do a lot of selling, or selling should be just quite natural. Because if you've actually uncovered, needs and wants of whoever you're designing for, your customer, your client, then the selling process becomes easier, in that you have now highlighted something, some unarticulated need that they've had, and it becomes evident to them why they would want to work with you necessarily versus perhaps one of your competitors. So I can bring an example of this. Is we worked locally with the Halifax Convention Center, and if you know the convention center business, it's really based on your location, your geographic location, to attract people to come to a conference. You know, the conference center has obviously has a beautiful brand new building and brand new branding, but that only stays new for so long. So we worked with them over a year and a half to talk to their clients, now their clients being the event planners, to understand, you know, why would they pick the convention center over another convention center to bring their conference to. And in doing that with their clients over a year and a half, we came to some, you know, unarticulated needs that the convention center now can deliver, regardless of whether they're not necessarily selling Halifax, but they now have something that they do differently than other convention centers that make it more appealing and easier for their event planners to bring their business to the Halifax Convention Center.
So by, you know, thinking about it directly in terms of, you know, enhancing a service design, an experiential design for customers or product development, obviously that leads to hopefully market share, but it's a little bit further downstream, right?
Right. Is what I'm saying. So they have something now that makes it so appealing for their clients want to come to them for this reason, versus because it makes their life easier, and that's what it's all about. So the selling process doesn't become as difficult.
Okay, questions are coming in thick and fast here, so let's keep moving along. So can you tell us a little bit about the Design Thinkers Network?
Okay, I can. So the network was formed in 2007, and again, coming out of Amsterdam, and it is, so we're not a structured, we're a network and not a structured, we're a collective instead of a structured organization. And we have teams across, I think, 20 plus countries now. And what makes that very interesting is that we can draw resources we can get pictures of what's happening in different parts of the world, and we can bring people with different experiences to bear on any of our projects. So that can either have different professional experiences, but also different cultural backgrounds and experience to bear on any project. So the group as a whole is probably, I would say, probably about 60 people, maybe 20 teams, 60 people, maybe a bit more than that. But the idea is that we support each other in our work, and we join forces, especially when we're doing bigger global projects and have bigger organizations that are our clients.
Yeah, so I'm going to relate a question that's a little down the pipe here to what you just talked about. So you know, and the network that people that you work with, you've worked with some of the, you know, most well-known brands in the world. But that said, is design thinking suited, you know, in particular for large organizations, or can it be suited to, you know, any small, medium enterprise, or we've talked about NFB?
Any small, medium enterprise as well. In fact, if you ask me, they have a greater chance of succeeding because they have less people over which they have to spread the practice. So it's a lot easier to achieve. Design thinking works best when you can spread it through an organization and ensure everybody is in some form or fashion participating in the method somehow and understanding the value of it. And that for sure is a lot easier to accomplish. And I have worked with some very large organizations. That is a lot easier to accomplish in a smaller organization than it is in a larger one. I've worked with large organizations where they have innovation teams that use human-centered design, and then the rest of the organization brings those projects to that team. And I find that you know, that works. But the real magic happens is when you can spread design thinking through the entire organization. And for large organizations, that's really hard because, you know, when you have 80,000 employees, that's kind of hard to do. quickly.
So it's a culture change tool.
It is absolutely a culture change tool. I've had clients who said, our employees now speak about the customer in a completely different way based on going through a design thinking project. They understand customer feedback, what customer feedback really is, and it's not feedback, it's really the walking in their shoes part. They talk about it entirely differently than they did before.
Yeah, I want to jump on that. It's not a question that's in the queue here, but testing is such a huge part of it. You talked a little bit about prototyping, but prototyping is really just a way to get to a testing phase. So just talk a little bit about how important that is, like validating with the customer that you're working with.
Well, it's important validating. Prototyping is first important because it allows you to get an idea kind of out in the world in a 3D format. Because if it's out in the world in a 3D format, then you can have a conversation about it. And so you take that back. So you've done your research at the front end and you now feel you have a good understanding of what the consumer, client, whoever you're designing for needs. But it's very important to take what you're coming up with as you're going through the method and testing back with them, saying, well, we've come up with this, and you know, how does this work for you, and what would you change? And invariably they will continue to input into that for you to iterate and make that better and better and better all the time. And just a note, you know, developing a beautiful, you know, prototype app or whatever you want to call it over a year and then showing it to a client doesn't work the same way. People react far better and give you a more honest feedback when they don't think you've spent millions of dollars designing a prototype, when you rapid prototype something and share with them directly, and they give you far more immediate and heartfelt feedback.
In the lingo, there's a term for that, right?
In the lingo?
Right. What do we call that? What do we call those rough, rapid prototypes?
Oh, you don't want me to say that on here, do you? We call it the shitty first draft. The shitty first draft. So if
it's an acronym. It's a real thing. SFD. So it's
okay. So that's the one you want to get out there and test with people as soon as you can, because then you get to the happy place faster.
Here's an interesting one. I'm not going to lie to you, Adriana. This is going to make you think. I'm in finance and very much interested in design thinking as a tool to address financial issues. Can you help me articulate, perhaps with an example, how design thinking can be applied to a specifically financial application?
Well, in many ways, in the sense that, and I worked with a financial client, so just give me a second here, but it only comes when you really want to honestly design, not just for, you know, increasing how many clients you have or how much of their portfolio is in your bank with them. It really helps when you're trying to solve for their real life needs. So, and again, that was that whole thing, don't design for money, design for meaning. So you can get to, you know, the deeper goals that your customers and clients are trying to get to in their own lives. If you can figure out what that, you know, what that is and how you can help them get there, they're going to come to you over somebody else all the time. So if you do it with intention to solve for some of their issues in their life, then they'll choose to see you as a partner in that venture, and not just somebody they do business with, or that they have to do business with because they don't have any other choices, because everybody else looks quite the same. You know, so it's about understanding their needs at a much deeper level. So yeah, without divulging exactly the particulars of the project, that's as best as I could describe it.
But some of the biggest banks in the world use design thinking. I'm thinking the ING bank in Europe. It's the what's the one in Scotland? Is it IBS?
Yeah, and RBC here and TD here, so they are employing these things.
I mean, in the sense of financial services and its service design, obviously it's very applicable. I'm just not exactly sure if the questioner meant specifically finances in the sense of financial services, or whether they meant whether it was a tool that you could use in the financial department of a corporation, or if they actually meant directly as a bottom line application. And if the questioner wants to clarify perhaps a little bit further what they meant, please feel free to just shoot Bree another note, just to make sure that we answered the question for them. Did you want to say something else?
Go ahead.
Here's another question which I think is very relevant right now, and how, in the sense of intercultural competency, can we use the design thinking method to enhance our intercultural skills for better understanding other cultures and interacting with individuals from other cultures? Let's just take that further, presumably within a team or within an organizational setting or within a service design scenario.
It very important, actually, because as you know, we talked about the idea of diversity of thought being key. Okay, so one way of getting diversity of thought is not just your professional background and what you do, but also your cultural background, and different cultures have different histories and different ways of doing things, and it's in bringing these these people into the same room together and employing what I think I mentioned was called the beginner's mind. So you can't walk into the room just constantly thinking that there's only one way to do things and I know the best way to do it. So it's about being more open to asking questions, and again, exploring the problem space and staying in that problem space longer, as opposed to just jumping to conclusions and solutions. You know, I hear today on the radio on CBC about how, you know, difficult immigrants are having, you know, actually getting work in Nova Scotia, coming in from all, and they're highly qualified people that are fluent in English, but perhaps because of an accent, or it's, you know, being misinterpreted as they don't have anything to add, and that's, you know, we lose out of that. We lose out of that equation. So the more diversity, cultural and otherwise, that you can bring to bear on a problem, and stay in that open space and open-mindedness, the more you might get to a place that you never thought you might get to. You know, you come up with a solution that you never would have come up with otherwise. So it's very important. And we're proof of it because our team reflects that in the global nature of the cultures that, you know, that we have on our team.
It also is a practice where really acknowledging unconscious bias is a very important consideration.
Yep.
And would you agree it's a very democratic tool, in the sense that a lot of the methods and a lot of the tools that are used ensure that all voices are heard and that there is equity in how groups are invited to collaborate. So it's built in, wouldn't you say, to the method?
Very much baked in, and people often say, well, it's all about the tools, and it's like, well, not really. It's actually it's how you use the tools. And so we, you know, people might know us for using a lot of Post-it notes and Sharpie markers, and there's a reason for that, because if you get your own thinking out onto a small piece of paper first, then it ensures that everybody has to share their thoughts. When we jump directly into discussion, you know, on any topic that we want to try and solve for, invariably 3 weeks later, we're still there discussing it. So it's again, action oriented, but also done with the purpose of getting everybody's thoughts out first and then trying to sort through them and share that way. So, and not just for cultural background, but you've got extroverts and introverts, and you have introverts who you might be sitting on some brilliant thoughts, but they're not, if you can't get them out, then they're not helping anybody. So this is a method of trying to uncover and get everything out onto the table. It's that diverge thing where you want as much out onto the table, and then you can sort through, what are the important pieces and what aren't.
Right. And then in terms of, the research phase, lived experiences are vital to the development of personas. So that's another way that really deeply understanding individuals from a cultural context is absolutely imperative.
I agree. That's why we rely very heavily on qualitative and ethnographic type research, where you're either doing cultural probes where you have people, giving you notes on what they're doing in relation to whatever your challenge is, or you're doing very structured, deeper interviews with them, or quite frankly, they don't know they're being observed, but you're observing them. So these are all methods we use to make sure we understand who we're designing for. But quite frankly, I'm a big believer of bringing them into the room. So the literal part. So, you can bring the research into the room, but it's even better when you bring the people into the room, because I had one CEO say, I don't care how many surveys I've seen, there's nothing like standing up against a wall with my client or my customer to understand what they're living through. That's a much deeper understanding of why things happen and how it makes people feel.
A follow-up on the question relating to the finance scenario, and I think I actually understand it better now, and I think you will too. So the questioner was specifically looking at designing a retirement portfolio for a client. So the question is, can design thinking can be applied in that setting, and how? And maybe so you could talk a little bit about the fact that you can actually use design thinking to design your life. and so how you might want to work on a retirement portfolio was related to that, right?
Absolutely. So, there are many choices to make when you're putting together a retirement portfolio for somebody, but you would really have to understand their goals, their life stage goals. I mean, obviously they're entering into retirement, so you need to have a deep understanding of their life stage goals to deliver something that meets their requirements, that is going to get them to where they want to go. So, I have a colleague who uses design thinking, maybe not formally, but is using some of the methodology in that field exactly. And it is understanding what they want to achieve, not how much you can get out of them. So, what's the plan that you can put together that gets them to where they want to go, and how are you, and not only gets them to where you want to go, but how are you doing it? Like, what's their experience with you through that process? Because that's what their experience, it's not just the outcome, but what they're experiencing is what's going to get you that client for life, so to speak.
So I'm going to end it with one more question, Adriana, which is my question. Which is just tell us a little bit about, you've talked about how it's collaborative and how it's very iterative, but one of the other words that we use to talk about design thinking is that it's playful.
It is playful, and actually I find that we lose something when we dismiss playfulness as a way to seeing the world. And so through design thinking, we can do all the research, but we always try and somehow introduce playful components and moments to it, because it's playfulness that kind of encourages creativity. It allows everybody to kind of relax, because they don't have to be, the smartest person in the room with the solution. And it's when you're kind of in this relaxed mode that's when ideas seem to really percolate and crop up. So we do encourage playfulness, and it's sometimes difficult because, especially when working with large organizations, they dismiss playfulness as, silliness, as opposed to with purpose, playing with purpose.
Great note to end on. So this is all the time that we have for today's webinar. So Adriana, thank you so much for this presentation. And I know that you customize and you give everything you have to every presentation that you make about design thinking. Your passion for the topic is very evident. Thank you to all of our audience members today. We hope that you found this interesting and relevant for your work and whatever sphere it is that you operate in. Please visit the SobeySchoolProsperityNetwork.com and sign up for the newsletter email list. That's the way that you can make sure that you're getting advice from the experts, and to register for upcoming webinars. And, excuse me, if you have any other questions about the topic today, please contact Bree through the website contact page, and she will put you in touch. And the lucky winner of Tim Brown's book will get a direct follow-up from Adriana after the session today. And Adriana and I, on both of our behalfs, we'd like to thank Bria for all your help and preparation, and wish everyone a wonderful, beautiful, sunny January day. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody. That was wonderful.